diving off McCormick's Dock in Clayton in the Thousand Islands. You see all the divers around there, and here comes an ice boat from probably Grindstone Island. It's one of their transportations. They also have snowmobiles. These were used quite frequently in the 60s and 70s. And there's McCormick's Dock, and there's the boys cutting the holes, and there's Bill Sharp. He's going over a couple pieces of wood, and here we come down with some sand for the put around the holes so that you don't slip. And this is just preparation for the dives. We got our dog mascot there. Got a Christmas tree in the hole so that can be spotted afterwards. Here's a trailer. We put a little bit too much sand in this trailer. And here comes Charlie Bender over to give a little assistance. And here comes Bill Marshall. He's another one of our club members. And this is the Clayton Diving Club activity. And we're shoveling out the sand, and here we are pushing it down over the hill. Come some of the divers in. A lot of heavy work here trying to get that. I think we had a little bit more sand than what we really needed. Get it going too fast, we'll probably run right off the dock with that trailer. Now we've had to cut 3 holes at this particular time because we had so many divers. We had almost 100 divers going through the ice. There's a couple of snowmobiles I mentioned earlier, and they're heading over for Grindstone. Over to Grindstone, I guess, that day. A few of the people standing around watching. There goes one of the first divers in the water. Now, if you look at him, he's got a vest on, and all it is just basically a buoyancy vest on the surface. We didn't have the buoyancy compensators like we do now, and the regulator, and that's all he had. He didn't have a backup regulator. He did have a submersible pressure gauge there, though, for telling what air he had in his tank. And of course we used a J valve at that particular time with a rod on it, so you see it's up right there, and you pull it down when he ran low on air. One of the divers trying to keep his hands warm, I guess. Now all these line tenders are divers, and they will be going in later on. We always use divers for line tenders. People walking over to the other hole. Other people standing around, other divers getting suited up, ready to go. And I guess the whole thing is looking at the gear in this. You see how really primitive the gear is. We didn't have, as I said before, we didn't have the buoyancy compensators. Visibility is really not great. Here comes a couple divers. They look like a young couple. They're divers that are going to go out and probably maybe make their first dive with us. They're smiling, that's why I figured it was a first dive through the ice. This is inside McCormick's, and McCormick's love to have us come up there because patrons can look right out the window and watch us diving, and they being nice and warm while we're out there freezing. And there's one of the holes, and there's the other hole right there, you can see it, and then there's another hole right there, down in that area. And look at all the people standing around. We used to get big turnouts for our ice dives. I guess we were a little crazy because we went all over the country. Everybody had an ice dive. We went to it. Now this is early 1970s, Carlton Island. This is the Carlton Island project. And that happens to be Howard Trowbridge. Standing there looking at me with the glasses. He's going to take my picture. And this is the Carlton Island, underwater Carlton Island project that the state and New York State Divers Association had a joint project on, and we worked on a shipwreck, finding a lot of goodies. And there's one out there doing a little snorkeling. We had some pipes drove in trying to get boundary markers and stuff like this for our grid. And that's the boat right there that I was using in this particular era of time. And that's one of our grid markers. Happened to be, I look like number 6. And now we're only in 15 feet of water. Real good weather, is sunny, and visibility was never really that great. But that's the keel of the boat. That's one of our cables that run up and down the boat for setting our grids. And this here is the keel again. You can see the squareness of it. And you see lots of weeds. Mainly you see a lot of weeds. This is prior to us actually excavating. We were just in the process of working on setting the grid up. And there's one of our grid squares, 4x4 squares is what they were. And they were reduced down to 1 foot squares inside the 4 foot square. And you can see weeds, and there is a ship underneath there, believe it or not. And the ship is 26 feet wide and 76 feet long. And we really never really identified it as a ship, but we think it might have been the sister ship of the Iroquois. Lots of weeds. Every now and again you'll see a rock or piece of wood. There's a rock right there. And the rock, most of these rocks are ballast. And we've done complete photographing of it, not with this camera, but with another camera. Now this is after the weeds have been removed from the area. This is probably a 4 foot square area. And we put an airlift in there after we had made sure there was no artifacts right there on top. And this is one of the ribs sticking out of the water, out of the mud I should say, not the water. There's a little artifact we found, looked like a bone of some sort. Now, this is the airlift in operation. It has a screen around it. It keeps the buttons that we were finding and small artifacts that would suck up through there. We trying to prevent that. On the surface we had a big sluice, and we had divers or people up there sifting through the mud that was being brought up and making sure there was no little artifacts coming up. And we were finding little needles, little gold needles, little things like that, little beads that were getting actually through the screen. This is really a pretty powerful airlift that we had working, but it was very tedious and slow work. We finally got the whole ship uncovered after a while. It was 3 years of pretty good hard work all summer long, on weekends only. And we had about every club in New York State Divers Association participating in the project. Now this is Tobermory, about mid-1970s, and we're up diving on the underwater habitat, and it was called Limnos. And they had a little telephone booth sitting out there where you go up in, purge your air, and you could talk to your buddy or whatever. Well, I had a underwater communication system, telephone to diver, diver to surface, and we set that up on the telephone, the underwater telephone. And this is the speaker. It looked like just a regular telephone, really. And this is the speaker part of it, and we're talking down to the divers. They're getting a big kick out of it. I don't know. Now it probably wouldn't. It's pretty primitive equipment, but it did work, and it worked halfway decent. We had a throat mic and an ear plug that you could listen to, and the throat mic, of course, is so you could talk. I see that I got a little leak in my buoyancy compensator. Since that ice dive, we've improved now a little bit. We've got buoyancy compensators and all the more fancier stuff that we did before. This is probably about 10 years later than from the ice dive. And he's in there talking right now to the surface. This is Lynn Bretsch, and he's talking up to the boat captain. There he is, bleeding off some air so that he could breathe in there without his regulators. And it's just kind of a fun thing. Since then, they have pulled all this stuff out, And I honestly don't know where the stuff is. I think it went to Toronto, maybe someplace on display. But it was in the water for a couple, 2 or 3 years, I guess. Now this is Gary Comstock, and he is one of the Syracuse Scuba Society guys. And he is now on top of Sublimnos in about 30 feet of water, somewhere in that vicinity. You can see his outline in his double tanks. And you can see the stripes of the top of Sublimnos, and it had a little plastic dome on top of it. It had windows around the sides, what have you. And it was weighted down by some, I guess, pretty heavy weights to hold this thing down, I guess. And all the divers just standing around looking at it, taking different, most everybody had some kind of a camera, and they were taking pictures and basically having a good time. Now the water temperature up there is pretty good. Now you see a little leak in my camera housing. I always had that. I never get it to stop for some reason. Never really amounted to much. And unfortunately there was nobody living in the habitat at the time, so the habitat was actually locked, so we couldn't go into the habitat, which we really wanted to do. But you can see a guy there with one of his cameras, still shot camera, I think it was. And you can see everybody peering in the windows. Now this here is a bunch of cinder blocks. They threw this down and used it as a underwater reef. They tried to build an artificial reef and draw fish to the area so they could study them while they're using the habitat. I don't know if anybody's got any pictures of this currently. I haven't heard of anybody having any pictures of the Sublimnos. But now this is Robert Rock Dashell. He's better known as Rocky. And he's making like he's going to go up inside there, but there's a big padlock keeping him out. Now this is yours truly. I'm sitting there on top of it, giving you a little wave. Rocky's running the camera right now for me. Told him I'd take his picture, he'd take mine.